realfaith.org.au.
My brother, who was living with us at the time, was really struggling with his mental health, and he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And he was traumatized. We'd all lost Mum recently, and then, we'd had a miscarriage, and now Jessie had died. And that day, we sat around the dining room table that night, and Jim came in, and he said, "Well, you won't see me in the morning." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I've had enough."
Welcome to Real Faith. Conversations about the impact faith has on our lives and the challenges we go through, helping us today and giving us hope for tomorrow. That's real people, real life, and real faith with Eric Scatterbo.
Well, our guest today is once again Cathy Scott. She's the author of the book, The Road to Zimkasalia, about the many places in the world that she's lived, including Zimbabwe, Kenya, South Africa, and then finally ending up here in Australia. Last time we heard about her time growing up in countries in Africa. Today, we're going to hear about her coming to Australia. Also, her book traces Cathy's own personal journey through fear, failure, and loss. Once again, she's joining us from her home in the outer eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Welcome back to the program, Cathy Scott.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you with us once again. And we ended last time you were in South Africa. You had just gotten married to David, who is your current husband of over 35 years. And at the time, you were 3 months pregnant when you got married. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And also you mentioned that somebody at the wedding, seeing you already pregnant, said, I give that couple about 1 year, tops.
Yep, that's correct.
But how did you guys respond?
Well, we responded by getting together on our first married night together and just committing our marriage to God. We figured, well, we've stuffed up at the beginning of our relationship. We want to commit it to God and make amends and actually make this work. So we committed that we would make our marriage work and we would not allow our past to define our future. So we decided that we were going to make it work and we would work on our relationship with God to actually bring God back into our relationship.
So that way you're off to a good start spiritually.
That's right.
And then how did you eventually get to Australia?
My mother had been very ill with cancer, as I'd mentioned the last time, when I was in my teens. And, in the first few years of our marriage, we had our son Michael and then we had our daughter Megan. And we had heard my mum was unwell again and we realized that time with her was short. We had visited Australia and we decided that we would actually like to live here. So within 5 years of our visit here, we came to live in Australia in 1991. And we wanted to be near my mum because we knew that she'd had cancer for all those years before. We knew that she wouldn't be around forever and we wanted to spend some time with her. So thankfully we came and had some very precious 4 years with her before she died. We settled really quickly, threw ourselves into the Aussie culture as far as we could. And we had another daughter while we were here, Sarah. And then it was when Sarah was a baby that we lost my mum. So that was a great grief, but we also knew that her life had stood for something amazing. And I never doubted her prayers for me and for us. And it was precious that she'd got to spend some time with my children, with her grandchildren, because the first couple of years of their lives, the older two, she hadn't had that opportunity. So that was special.
I'm assuming that your relationship with your parents improved by this point?
Yes, it had, yeah. We'd really worked on that and kept communication with them. I think once we told my parents we were pregnant and we were getting married, they actually were very supportive. They embraced us and realized, well, there's nothing we can do to change this, so they're going to support us. And that was the best thing they ever did for us.
Amen.
Just supporting us, yeah. And I knew that they prayed for us.
And did they move to Australia before you then?
They did. They came in 85. The year we were actually married, they came to Australia. So they hadn't been with us in those first few years when we had our children, our first two children. And Dad came here with World Vision. So they were settled here and they sponsored us to come. And that helped us to get here. So we came here with nothing pretty much other than about a couple of cubic meters of personal goods and started our home and our life from scratch. Yeah, then we, life goes on. We got settled. We got into a great church. We made some precious friends. And then I think it was 1997, I fell pregnant again, and I had a miscarriage at 16 weeks. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I'd never realized the kind of grief that can go along with a miscarriage. It was quite intense. It showed me that even though it was a new baby that wasn't even born and I hadn't held it yet, there were hopes and dreams attached to that pregnancy. And the death of those was pretty full on, and I really struggled with it.
And this was not long after the death of your mother, is that right?
Yeah, Mum died in 95 and this was in 97.
So dealing with loss on two different levels.
Yeah. And then not long after that, I actually fell pregnant again, and everything was going along fine, and yet I was quite wary because of the previous miscarriage, and I ended up having my baby early. It was about 25 weeks and 2 days. It was quite a traumatic circumstance, and he just started to come out, and we ended up in hospital, and they tried to keep the contractions away, but they couldn't stop it, and within 24 hours he was born. So he was tiny, he was perfect. I looked at him and I couldn't believe how perfect he was. His skin was quite transparent. It was quite amazing to see this little one, but he would look up at me, and so for 3 weeks while he was being cared for at the Monash Hospital, we were very involved in, pretty much between my husband and myself, trying to spend almost 24 hours around the clock with him. Well, not quite 24 hours, but we tried to spend as much time with him as we could. I would sing to him and just try to make sure he knew that we were there. It was quite a difficult time for our older children as well. At the age of 21 days, he died, and the funeral was a week later, and it happened to be the same day that my son graduated grade 6. So we had a funeral in the morning and a grade 6 graduation in the evening.
Oh, wow. What a day.
That was quite a big day. And it was difficult. But during that time, I don't know if I've ever experienced the presence of God the way I did through that time, the way we did. It broke our hearts. We were very sad, obviously. But the one thing that it did was it drew David and I closer together. It was an experience that could very easily, and does with some couples, rip them apart. But we were determined to really just lean on God in that time. And over the years, we've really, I guess, learned how faithful God is and how good he is even in the tough times.
That had to be so difficult. You're just starting to become attached to your young son, Jesse, and then he passed away.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. But, I've pondered a lot in my heart and wondered, if I was to redo my life, would I leave that out? And, I wouldn't, because I learned a lot. It broke my heart. I've cried like I've never cried before. But in that time, I could almost tangibly feel the presence of God with me. And I knew he was there. And I knew there was a reason. The Bible says that, God doesn't waste anything. There's things in our lives that happen that can cause so much pain and so much heartache, but he can use them. He can turn around what the enemy intended for evil. He can turn around for good. And the day actually that he died, we'd gone home, and my brother, who was living with us at the time, was really struggling with his mental health. He had gone through a stage in his young adulthood of smoking marijuana, and he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which was something that even back then it was talked about, but not nearly as much as it should have been. And I wish I'd known then what I know now. And it was something that, he was traumatized. We'd all lost Mum recently, and then, we'd lost our baby, and then this little baby was, we'd had a miscarriage, and now Jessie had died. And that day we sat around the dining room table that night, and Jim came in and he said, "Well, you won't see me in the morning." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I've had enough." And he basically told us that he was going to take his life.
Wow.
And I remember going into almost a fit of rage at him. And
this was the very day that your baby had died?
Yes. Yep. And I remember looking at him and shouting at him and saying, "How dare you be so selfish? We've just lost Mum. I've just lost my son. Do you think I need to lose my brother too? And
which is a natural reaction.
Yeah. And he didn't do anything at that time. And that was a relief. But I think there was so much going on in him. And, the marijuana had really messed up his mind.
Along with the mental illness.
That's right. And it was just so heartbreaking. In between all of that, my dad, having lost Mum, Dad actually remarried in the March of 98. And then my brother did actually take his life in the September of 98.
So
sorry
to hear that.
It was a very traumatic 3 years. All of that had happened within a 3-year period.
So how are you feeling after all this?
Oh, I was just holding on to God by my fingernails by this point.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I didn't have to hang on with my fingernails because he actually had his hand underneath me. He was holding me, and I felt like I was clinging to him, but he was holding me, and he was holding us all. And, the reality is that life goes on, and I still had children to get to sporting games. I still had school to organize. I still had a toddler. I had all these other things going on. But God has shown me time and again, and I do share some of this in my book, where he's actually given me words of promise through times, and because I journal a little bit, these things I could look back at, and he had told me to trust him. He told me to trust him, and he told me that he was with me no matter what happened at different times. And so I knew that in spite of the pain, he was there. And not long after that, I actually fell pregnant with our son Josh, and it was a very rocky pregnancy, and I had to stay in bed for probably 4 to 5 months of that pregnancy. But he was born healthy, and he's just about 22 years old now. So,
and he's doing well?
Absolutely, yes. There was nothing wrong with him at all. He was fine. So, yeah, God has been so faithful to us. It was, as it turned out, I actually, I guess I got a revelation of the fact that the Bible does talk about he gives, he takes away. He gives, he takes away.
Yeah.
And life happens to good people and bad people. Good things happen to good people and bad people.
The rain falls on the just and the unjust, as the Bible says.
That's right. That's right. And we can ask, why me? But sometimes the question isn't why me, sometimes why not me? Because I think God gives us grace to go through the circumstances we go through when we need it. Sometimes in advance of it, we don't even anticipate that we could imagine going through something like that.
Yeah.
But he does give us the grace to get through it because he's faithful.
Amen. Our guest today is once again Cathy Scott. She's the author of the book, The Road to Zim Casalia, Navigating Through Fear, Failure, and Loss. Today we're hearing about Cathy's life in Australia after growing up in various countries in Africa. And unfortunately, we're hearing how she's gone through a painful season of heartache and loss. We'll hear more of Cathy's story, including the joy painting brings to her life. That's all coming up when we return, right here on Real Faith.
The Word for Today is Australia's most widely read daily devotional,
designed to give you practical teaching to keep you focused on your relationship with Jesus.
Read it online or subscribe to the free printed edition
At thewordfortoday.com.au.
You're listening to Real Faith, conversations with real people about how God works in their lives. If you want to know more about integrating faith into your life, our website is realfaith.org.au. Just go to the website and you'll find helpful articles about the impact faith can have on your life. Once again, that's realfaith.org.au.
Welcome back. I'm Eric Scadabo, and today, once again, I'm chatting with Cathy Scott, who's sharing her life journey that began with her growing up in various countries in Africa. Today, she's sharing about her life after moving to Australia. Sadly, as we heard before the break, Cathy went through a painful season of heartache and loss. Now we'll hear what happened next as Cathy shares more of her story.
Well, life sort of settled down for a little while, and we've been on a journey learning a lot of things in the last few years, and one of the things that's become abundantly clear to us is that God honors our free will. And
how is that? I mean, I agree, obviously, but I'm curious to know how you came to that conclusion.
Well, I guess it's because God hasn't turned us into robots. He's given us free will,
Yep.
And he gives us a choice. We're given an ability to choose.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have to understand that with that ability to choose, there are consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when we make certain choices, like sometimes we make my dad did this to me, so I'm never going to do that. That's a vow.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that comes out of an unhealthy place.
Hmm.
And sometimes we've got to cut those things off and break them, because some of the vows we make may not be healthy. Some vows may be healthy, some may not. But we've got to come to the place where it's not actually all about our own rights, our own happiness, our own life and what we feel. There's a bigger picture here. And I think for myself and my husband, God's shown us a way to see life with a bigger picture. We've actually got an ability to see that He's able to do bigger than what we can imagine. And 2020 was a tough year. With COVID,
Yep.
for a lot of people it was a difficult year. For us, we had one of our daughters got married during that time, and she'd planned a wedding for years, and had a 5-people Zoom wedding.
Oh, wow.
And
that had to be very disappointing.
It was. Thankfully, we've been able to celebrate again since then and actually have a big party.
Oh, good.
And then my other daughter had twins, and that was a big event in the middle of that year. Then we've also had my father, who became quite rapidly ill. For a man who worked hard at being a healthy, fit man, he was 80 years old, and to be honest, I always thought he would outlive us. But he became very ill very quickly.
Yeah.
And we watched him decline during a time when restrictions were really quite difficult. And he passed away in August 2020. And so...
Were you able to be with him?
I was able to visit him. You know, I was helping to care for him at times, but I was determined to visit him and see him regularly, so I did. It was difficult, and it did restrict things, and I must admit there were times when I was traveling to see him where I was praying that nobody would notice I was out of my kilometre zone. But I figured that the reason was important enough because, you know, Dad and I have been through rocky years of our relationship, but God restored what was lost. And when I first published this book, before I published it, I asked Dad to read it, and I prayed and I said, Lord, please just let him publish it, because I want to honour him. I don't want to talk down about him, but I want to be real. And I believe authenticity is important. So I'd written from a point of view of my perspective and how I felt. And Dad, within days of giving him a draft copy, he came over and he gave me the biggest hug, and through tears in his eyes, he just hugged me and he said, Kath, I'm proud of you. And that was like years in the waiting.
Yeah, because that's what you most wanted when you were a child, was a big hug.
Yes, yeah. And, you know, he softened in his later years. He softened, and I think his heart was always for people. But his heart has always been, I always felt that the people in poverty and the people that were homeless were more important than his own kids. I don't think he ever intended that, and I know he never intended that. He knew we had a good, healthy upbringing in many ways. You know, we had food on the table, we had good clothes, we had whatever we needed. But he was able to express himself more in later years in a way that really showed. I think there were regrets there for him too. But in those months with him being very ill, I was able to sit next to his bed and look at him, and some days I had nothing to say, and I knew there was nothing more to say because there was no regret. The air was cleared. I honoured him. I loved him, and I know that he's gone to be with the Lord. That's no doubt at all. He was anxious to go and be with the Lord. So much as it's been heartbreaking to say goodbye to him, I'm thrilled for his sake. Of course, we miss him. But, yeah.
So through all the ups and downs, some of the valleys you've been through, some of your own making, but you know God's faithful and to never give up hope.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And recently, something that's really been ministering to you is you've been getting into painting. Is that right?
I have, yes. That's another little story with that. When I was 14, in the midst of all that turmoil back in Zimbabwe, I had to do an art class occasionally. And I had a teacher say to me, oh, Cathy, you shouldn't do art. You've got absolutely no potential. I don't think this is a class for you.
Oh, wow. Really
and
encouraging.
I left that class. I left that class. And from then until my mid-40s, I thought, I'm not creative. I just didn't believe I was. And then one day I got a revelation of the fact that I must have creativity in me because I'm made in God's image.
Mm-hmm.
So if I know who I am in God, there must be something creative in me. And now I dabble in just about anything creative. I love creative stuff.
Oh, good on you.
I am painting, I'm doing art, and I'm teaching art as well.
You're teaching art?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
How did you become an art teacher?
Oh, look, I am not a qualified teacher in any way, but I share my skill. What I learn, I pass on.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And just in the process of building that, teaching from my home in Belgrave South, where my husband has built me a studio.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, I'm very blessed. I love the fact that it is such a therapeutic tool.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that allows people to express themselves in their own way. And I think for me, it's just like, wow, you're never too old to learn a new thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the greatest joys I've had is opening my home to people coming to do something creative. And I had a lovely lady come who was, I think she was over 70, and she said she'd never painted before, but she'd like to have a try.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've heard back since that she loved it, since that she's now teaching her grandkids. And I'm like, wow, it's so rewarding when someone who doesn't think they can do something discovers they can.
Yeah.
And that's been my experience of my own journey.
Yeah.
And I think for so many years, my identity was wrapped up in what I could or couldn't do, whether I got good or bad grades at school, whether
Mm-hmm.
I pleased my parents or not.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I have discovered that God actually made me unique, and He makes each of us quite unique. And it's okay to be who we are. And He just wants us to express ourselves
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is healthy and in a way that is unique. The way He made us to express ourselves. And art is worship. And, you know, I'm musical too, so the music and the art and the other creativity, whatever it is, God speaks through that. And many people are visual and relate to a piece of art and can see God speak to them through that. So,
wow. So your creative soul is now flourishing.
Definitely.
After many years of maybe being stifled a little bit?
Yeah, probably. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think I spent many years worrying about what everybody thought and trying to fit into a mold that possibly didn't fit me quite well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I also grew up with perfectionism. My dad was a perfectionist initially. He learned as later years happened that wasn't a good thing. But, you know, in my early years, it was made out to be the right thing. And so if I couldn't do it well, it wasn't worth doing. And so I shied away from doing a lot of those sort of things for many years. But now I'm going to have a go, and if I fail, it doesn't matter. It's just part of the learning curve, you know, and it's made me bold. I guess it's made me bold. I'll have a go, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't work, because you just don't know if you don't have a try.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and this is, you know, connecting with people. That's the other heart of my art teaching as well, and just the gathering of people. My heart is to see people connect. People need each other.
Mm-hmm.
We need each other, and we need God. And, you know, the commandments that say, love God, love others, love your neighbor. Gathering people together is definitely my heart, and seeing people connect, seeing people come alive, doing something that they enjoy, that's absolutely at the core of what I do.
What a beautiful thing. You're coming into your own.
Yeah.
It's never too late
It's taken
to try
a long
something
time.
new. I was thinking that, but I wasn't going to say it.
Yeah, I think, you know what, it's just the journey of faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are your gifts, and you're operating in your gifts, and you're developing the gifts, your God-given gifts, and blessing other people. And if people want to see your art, they can go to your website.
That's right, yes. Yeah, they can.
So if you're visually oriented, you can go to cathyscott.com.au and see some of her artwork and see how she's expressing herself these days. Anything else? Any concluding comments you want to share with our listeners about your life journey?
Yeah, look, maybe just a couple of things that people have told me after reading my book. I've had a relative ring me saying, my goodness, I never knew that about you. And they wanted to say sorry they never knew. But they also said, reading your story has inspired me, and all I want to do is have faith that is real like yours, and I want to read my Bible. And that made it worth it for me, because if that inspires someone to get closer to God, then that is worth every bit of it. The other feedback I've had from somebody else was that I say in my book that people have said to me, how can you still love God with all you've gone through? How can you still trust Him? And my response to that is, how can I not? There is no other option. And, you know, I did try life without God. And trying life without God is what got me into trouble and got me miserable. And yet my life with God is an understanding that, you know, God can bring beauty from ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, a garment of praise for a spirit of heaviness. He's a God who replaces pain with joy. And that is my message of hope. This book is written to inspire hope and to hopefully allow people to see that it doesn't matter what you go through. The faithfulness of God is real, and that sounds so cliche, but it's my living life. It's absolute proof in me. There's the power of your testimony, you know. It's just God is good and He's faithful even in the worst times. And we need to acknowledge Him and give Him glory because it's all about Him.
Amen. Well, Cathy Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your hope with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored.
Well, that was part 2 of my conversation with Cathy Scott, the author of the book, The Road to Zim Casalia, Navigating Through Fear, Failure, and Loss. To find out more about Cathy and her book, and to look at some of her paintings, you can go to her website. It's Cathy, that's with a C, cathyscott.com.au. Once again, that's Cathy with a C.com.au. Well, thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of Cathy Scott's story. And until next time, I'm Eric Scadabo. So long, and God bless.
You've been listening to Real Faith, and if you have any questions or comments, you can send us a message through our website, realfaith.org.au. That's realfaith.org.au.
Real Faith is a production of Vision Christian Media.
This program is a production of Vision Christian Media.
To find out more about us, see vision.org.au.